Hi everyone, welcome to the Dare Act Conversation series powered by the Grey Matter. Our endeavor with the series is to bring forward stories of lawyers who've dared to act differently by taking up unconventional, unpopular career paths. Today we have Dr. Amal Sethi join us for the Dare Act chat. He's a fellow at the University of Pennsylvania. He has also obtained his master's and doctorate from here. So let's hear from him his journey from India to US and explore the world of legal academia. Hi Amal, how are you?
Hello, 1 second.
Yes.
Yes, yep. Hi.
Hi, how are you doing? Welcome to Dare Act.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
Are you holding the phone, Amal, is it?
Yeah, I don't have a stand.
Oh no.
I thought this works on my computer, but it doesn't. So it's fine.
Can you keep it somewhere? Can you keep your phone somewhere? Is it possible?
I don't think so, but I'll try to hold it steady.
All right. Okay. So let us take you down the memory lane, shall we?
Okay, sure.
Okay, so you scored fairly well in your 12th standard. You were very, very clear you wanted to pursue liberal arts and social science stream. Law was never a part of your plan. Share with us how it all happened.
So yeah, like we had discussed, law wasn't the part of the plan. I think actually somewhere around the boards or after the boards, I had no idea that there's a thing known as CLAT. So it's actually a kind of funny story. So I met one of my cousins who was interested in law, and he was mentioning that he's awaiting the CLAT exams, and while he does that, he'll also apply to a place known as GLC and ILS. And I started asking what really is GLC ILS, and he told me that they're law colleges which like don't take people based on entrance exam, but rather board marks. And I got curious. I thought it's and actually he had asked me to get a form for himself when I go to buy a form for St. Xavier's, which was also another institute I was looking, because in case, let's say, I didn't get into DU, and St. Xavier's is a very similar college. Somewhere in, going there and buying the form for him, I just gave it a shot and I said, you know what, let me buy this GLC form. It's for 5 rupees or 10 rupees. It doesn't seem like, let's just put in an application. As it is, I had this 1-day plan where I said I'll buy like all the forms for South Bombay colleges, just put in my application. You never know with cutoffs where they'll go. GLC actually, I think, was one of the first colleges to have its merit lists out. And very soon after the merit lists were out, they started college. It was, in fact, I think their college started before any other merit list was out, let alone, I think, the forms for DU. Unlike other years, in our year, actually, GLC started quite early. I think they started their lectures in perhaps June itself or something. And I said, let's start attending. Somewhere that let's start attending, it just became a really long thing, and I never ended up leaving and applying elsewhere. So I think that's how I joined law. I didn't have any plan to become a lawyer. And, and this was actually true for the first 6 months. Since I never had a plan to be a lawyer, I never really gave a thought to what, being a lawyer is. I was kind of all over the place. I didn't really even think about what is it that I have to do as the next step. So the first few months actually just went with going with the flow. So yeah, I don't have a very conventional story of joining law, but looking back, it's there's another thing I forgot to mention. One of the reasons I said, okay, let's continue with this is I was thinking that so what would I study otherwise? My plan was to study something like a combination of political science, history, economics at a liberal arts college, such as Xavier, Stephens, etc. And I said, all these things we're going to study in the first 2 years. So anywhere after Xavier or something, I would perhaps need to go to a JNU or something for another year of master's before I can apply abroad. So I said, this is giving me a 5-year degree. So even if I want to pursue history or political science, this is a degree that would work well. So yeah, that was how I entered law.
Quite fascinating, huh? But going to buy a form for a cousin, end up applying yourself. That's quite interesting. Okay, so the initial years at GLC are fairly flexible, and you have a lot of time in hand, which also gives an opportunity to kind of explore hobbies and explore world in general. However, for many students, this can be a bit overwhelming. Tell us, how did you handle the absence of a structured curriculum and college life?
In fact, I wouldn't even just say the first initial years. I think, the way traditional universities like GLC or even Delhi University or one of these work is they aren't really structured. They have really outdated curriculums, and, because, unlike again some of the more newer institutes, lectures are fairly short. I think GLC had 3 hours of lectures a day. And the way exams are designed, you don't need to study year round. This is a big challenge with with a lot of institutions in India. In fact, I was yesterday discussing with someone who went to the National Law School, Bangalore, and then went out, that how GLC is so unlike any of these colleges where there's literally actually, and I'll be looking back, you can definitely say that there's not much to do. There actually isn't much to do in college. And I remember, first 2 years we did have regular lectures. As sad as it sounds, in later years we didn't have lectures. I remember going for again, just because you feel okay, you're in a college, you should do something. I remember waking up early in the morning, going for 7 o'clock lectures for professors to not show up. So sadly, GLC is one of those places. And for better or worse, I think the lack of structure doesn't work out for most people. Most people need that structure in life. I think it's the structure. And I think even going back to my years outside India, it's a structure that helped me. It's a plan in action, a concrete plan in action that, so in GLC that was not there. While I think at that point in life, I thought I'm doing well with my time, but looking back, no, it wasn't always necessary. So I wouldn't say that I made a good use of my time, but one thing I tried to do always was keep myself busy with things. I didn't have too many, interests in, say, organizing things, or even just plain socializing or hanging out with people. So the way I, tried to keep busy was with whatever I could do, be it a moot, writing paper. I did have a very human rights bent back then. So at any given point in my law school life, I think I was involved with some or the other NGO. So pretty much that was how I kept busy. And one thing I tried to do throughout GLC, again, the lack of structure, was make a point that I actually have 5 days of something to do in a week, or at least 4, if not 5. So I think that was something I, throughout law school, did try and, keep in mind that I at least, whatever is there on the schedule, be it perhaps writing a paper or moots are a very dominant activity in law school, and everyone ends up doing that. So even if I'm doing a moot, it's something that keeps me busy for 4 days. So that was kind of my plan throughout GLC. Sometimes it worked, sometimes I got overwhelmed, sometimes something, didn't go according to plan, so you have less than 4 days of work actually. But that was actually the kind of goal. And again, we spoke about the lack of structure. So one thing the lack of structure did was I didn't know what are the possibilities. So a lot of things I relied on was something just opening up, and I do say that I'm lucky enough that at any given point in those 5 years of law school, something did open up. I mentioned to you earlier that actually till date in my life, I've never applied for an internship ever, or a so-called job. But I have technically had an internship at any given point in GLC. The same goes with, I wouldn't call them internships, but I would say involved with something outside my curriculum as when I was doing my doctorate. But weirdly, and again, at the same time, I'm someone, I don't have a legal background. My parents do something very different. I actually don't have even family friends who are lawyers or do anything similar to what I do. So I don't have those kind of connections that can get something. But weirdly, at every given space and time, I consider myself lucky enough to like have that, find just something random that, made it worthwhile. Perhaps it could just be someone, randomly messaging and asking, hey, I'm doing this. I need help with something. Do you want to help out? To sometimes just bumping into someone somewhere who said that, I run this and I'm looking for someone to help me with it. Would you be interested? So those moments have actually, for better or worse, always opened up for me. So yeah, that's pretty much how I've like kept busy throughout perhaps law school.
Wonderful. And tell us a little bit about your internship experiences. What kind of internships were you
So I think my most significant one was for 3 years I worked on the Godhra riot litigations with a lady called Tista Setalvar, who was very involved with, at least till the point that the current government got elected and they really, clamped down upon organizations. I was very largely involved with that. And that again in hindsight is one of, a very important learning aspect for something like I'm currently just in a very small way. I didn't understand sometimes these things. A lot of us don't realize this, but the Godhra riots happened. And one of the reasons people didn't get convicted the way they should have ideally was because a lot of stuff was happening in Gujarat, which was still a BJP ruled state. And they did have the state machinery to make sure that at least, things don't happen to their detriment. And these were things I didn't really understand as perhaps a law student. That, okay, why are witnesses backing out? Or why is this NGO having suddenly a financial inquiry into them? But, later all these things, they started getting stitched together. And, I started figuring out how governments clamp down on organizations, and it's actually a trend that's happening all over the world. But a lot of these things, I think at that moment I didn't realize how significant they are. But later in life, I started valuing these things more. So that was one thing I spent actually almost 3 years doing. I did spend another, I think, about 1.5, 2 years helping a judge write a book. This judge, generally, he was a retired chief justice, and he liked engaging in small conversations. And we had a lot of small conversations. Sometimes I used to just think that, I used to think of it as how I have these random conversations about, I don't know, with my granddad or something. And I used to think of them like this sweet, nice conversations. Yeah. But today I worked on constitutional courts and constitutions, etc. And a lot of those conversations, they play back. And and one thing I started realizing is how exactly the judiciary works. It's not, it's, for example, a lot of this is actually an important part of my own research, that a lot of lawyers think that judges decide cases according to the law. And the entire breadth of social science scholarship will tell you that no, judges don't decide according to law. They pretend to decide according to law. What they really decide is according to several other factors, most important of it being the political climate in a country. And I'm talking about constitutional decisions. Judges' own political views and own views about things really influence things. So law is just a garb to put in those things. And, sometimes those conversations just play back, and I'm like, I had this conversation with him and it makes so much sense. I just thought of it as this random exercise. But, so yeah, a lot of these internships. So these were two things I think I spent a lot of time involved with. And both of them, I don't, and again, the one thing I want to specify is, unlike a lot of people in GLC, I never did anything full-time. The only full-time internship I ever did in my life was about a 20-day one with the senior counsel, which I absolutely hated. I found myself totally lost there. I hated the environment. I hated sitting in. So none of these were actually full-time gigs. So I made sure that to only say yes to part-time things, gave me the ability to.
Amal, your voice is cracking.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
No, it's.
Is it better?
Your screen is a little hazy.
Okay, let me try one thing. Let me.
Just give me a second. I'll add him again. Yeah, much better.
Hello, is this better?
Yes, much better. Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
I actually switched off my Wi-Fi.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. So you were talking about your experience with, basically you were talking about not doing any full-time internships, and you did very.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think like one of the big things for me in GLC, or like at least as an undergrad student, which I saw a lot of people, I'm very thankful that I didn't give in to peer pressure there, was ensure that I don't burn out. And I think that was very vital. And I do see a lot of most conversations I ever have with people about applying to for masters or anything like related to what I do and which people would want to do is always like people ask me, hey, I want to do a master's because I'm really burnt out with my job. Most of the times it comes down to that. And I think I'm very glad that at least those 5 years of law school, I never burnt myself out. So I made a conscious effort to not overdo things, at least to the extent that I'm working 16 hours a day, 17 hours a day, especially things that, are not productive. And I really like that way thank the 20-day of an internship I said with the senior counsel for that. Like I said, I totally hated it. There was very few things I honestly liked about it. And I said that, what, I'm not going to like sit in an office, do nothing, stare at a screen for 5 years of college, or like, end up doing things which, just like pulling a case out of one of those legal databases like Manupatra itself. That was something I like in my first year told me I am not doing. Even if I have to do this for a living, I'm not doing that as a living. I will, become a. And I remember like having this conversation with my mother that, I found this so boring that I would rather sit and be like a tele salesperson than sit in a law firm and do this. I didn't know if there's something more challenging, and if there was, I would definitely be interested in doing that. But at least at that point, I said, okay, I'm not doing these kind of internships anymore. So I do like thank that. Yeah.
I'm saying you got clarity fairly at an early stage.
Yeah, I when you hate something so much, you know that, okay, this is something I'm not going to give another shot to.
Speaking of mooting, like you said, mooting is the most popular co-curricular activity amongst law students, and most of the colleges, including I would say GLC for that matter, we didn't really have anyone teaching us the skill sets or the expertise that are required. When you go for these moots, and you're kind of left on your own to figure things out. You, on the other hand, not only represented GLC, but you also did fantastically well in some substantial moots like Jessup, Manfred, DM Harish, that too in the first 3 years of your law school. So tell us, how did you crack the code and how was your mooting experience?
So I don't think there's anything like, like cracking a moot or something. I think like a lot of these competitions, they require time commitment. And one thing like, I often tell people like, pretty much on a daily basis, I have a junior from not only GLC, from any other random college also in India, across India, sending me a message or something for moot advice. And I often see people taking up moots along with 50 other different things. So I think, the thing to bear in mind is, especially if you want to do the main major moot courts in India, this is my personal opinion. People might disagree, and there might be some people who are just genuinely gifted mooters or researchers, etc. They require time commitment. So for me, and I don't know if like I would really say that I did very well in moots, but definitely according to like what was happening in GLC, yes, perhaps in some substantial moots, my team's performance was better than what our contemporaries were doing. But I think like every moot I did, I was one lucky enough to have a team that was quite committed, and number two was during like the entire phase of mooting, we just work hard. So I think, like for any student looking at this, if big moots are what you want to do, it requires commitment. For example, if you're doing a Jessup, it requires 6 months of doing nothing else. There is no way in hell you're making it to the world rounds by juggling a moot and a full-time internship at a law firm. There is no way you're winning a moot while simultaneously organizing 3 conferences. And I think in GLC, especially in a place like GLC, there aren't enough people to tell you that. For me, again, no, there was no one to tell me that. The reason I ended up spending time spending a lot of time on a moot was because I, didn't have anything else to do in life. Also, I think, in my very first moot, I realized there were definitely teams better than us. Like, it wasn't as if we won the moot. But one thing we realized was that, at least I realized, was some of the top national law school teams that were there, you come to know the number of hours they've put in. So things like moot courts, especially big moot courts, and I think it's the same for if you're writing a paper and you want to get it published at the top place. There is no substitute for putting in time. Obviously, in places like GLC, we don't have the infrastructural support for guidance. That's why, a lot of times trial and error is the best way. So for example, again, I had this conversation with some junior, and some junior said, like, how do you prepare yourself for Jessup? And I said, I actually don't have a very good answer. And then they followed it up with, how did you prepare? I said, actually, the way I prepared was by losing a few moots before that. Or not really doing that well as the moot would allow to do before that. And you learn from your mistakes. So either, you have the exact mentors in place to help you, or you just, figure it out by failing a few times. And that's not the worst thing, I think that's the way, you learn the best in life. Yeah. So I think for me, by the time I think I did decently well in a moot was because of not doing well. I think every moot was a progressive improvement. So, like I mentioned, I've actually a lot of people think I mooted a lot, but I actually didn't. I just did 3 moots over 3 years. But by the time I reached my 3rd moot, I learned from my past 2 moots. So I think, that was how I did mooting. But yeah, I'm not going to deny that it sucks not to have mentors. It's pathetic not to have, the kind of guidance certain other universities have. And again, looking back, that's something, I really feel kind of sad that we don't have that. There are institutes all over the world, and even in India, where you have people holding your hands for everything. So sometimes, even beyond just faring well in something, trying your best, mentorship and guidance does make a difference. So yeah, I mean, it's even for current people in a place like GLC, that sadly is the case. And my only suggestion would them to be to possibly reach out to every person they can ever think could be helpful.
Thank you.
And that's again one of those things I didn't do enough. But yeah, I think I went on a long and divergent
tangent.
time.
You went the hard way, and you put a lot of hours, and you try to do everything all by yourself.
Pretty much yes. And while at that moment, that's given space and time, I thought I was doing pretty well. I know looking back that it wasn't I didn't know as many things as, I thought I knew. But yeah, things went on.
Wonderful.
You
went ahead and, did your LLM. Tell us what inspired you to pursue LLM, and how did you narrow down on the college and your subject?
So I always wanted to get into research or academia, and I knew at least some graduate level of studies is a must for that. And because that was the goal, I especially with the kind of opportunities initially available in India after graduation, I said, you know what, I'm not going to get something really great. Most probably I'd be working at a think tank, not doing, again, very substantial work. At least, again, as straight graduates often don't end up doing that much substantial work. So I said, you know what, let me give applying for masters a thought, not a thought, a shot rather. So that was, I mean, how and why I decided to apply for masters. There wasn't some really life-changing moment that led to that moment. As to colleges, I think different people have different things. Again, I started thinking about like which colleges to apply in my fourth year. No matter how much you think at that time, there's not much you know about these things. I wasn't very confident of getting into, say, a Harvard or Yale. So I basically and I didn't want to go to the UK because at that point, their course structures didn't fascinate me that much. So I basically applied to the next 12 best universities in the US. I think I had like a pretty successful cycle. I don't think in any of those, I did back out of a few before getting decisions, but I don't think I got a reject from anyone. But I think for me, the selection really came down to, like I said, at some point I wanted a research career. A master's is pretty much a must for it. And by research career, I definitely do mean potentially academia. And I knew like a PhD or a doctorate, by whatever name it goes, would definitely be useful. So a large part of my strategy of choosing a master's program actually wasn't about the master's program itself, but it was about, you know, the doctorate programs at that particular place. And I think I won't bore people with that because there are a lot of different considerations that go into like how does one go about doctorates, but it's a very strategic process. And the university that I chose at that point gave me the most positive signals of being that this could be the right place for me to pursue a doctorate.
And so you did your master's in international law, is it?
No, so I did a general master's to start with, and I took a very wide range of courses. But yes, most of my courses were either in public law or international law. So I did take a few constitutional law classes, a few legal theory classes, and I did take a few international law courses as well. So again, at that point, you know, since I said I came from like a kind of an NGO background, and a lot of, you know, human rights issues, they work on the intersection of international and public law. So my aim was rather not to take international law classes or particular law classes per se, but it was to take classes in this human, perhaps that would enhance my knowledge or whatever of this domain of human rights and that kind of thinking.
And speaking of doctorate, you know what, my understanding is that earning a doctorate is extremely competitive, and that too at the top universities, because very, very few people actually get chosen for it. You've told us what inspired you to do doctorate. It was a planned decision from the beginning. Tell us, however, you did your doctorate in constitutional law and theory. So why don't you tell us the story behind how that subject came to your life?
Okay, so I actually have, I think, bar the one subject in government law college when we study constitutional law, and that also I didn't study it properly. I've never done a word of constitutional law in my life. Like, if someone was to ask me any constitutional, and I still perhaps would be there with Indian constitutional law, but if someone was to ask me like any random case on constitutional law outside, you know, your standard case on the Bhartis, especially after GLC, I would have no clue. But for me, like, you know, again, looking back, I think I went for a master's too early. I had no idea about what my research interests were. I had not even thought about, like, you know, I didn't even know what a PhD entails, rather than the fact that, oh, I think this is something I need. So yes, looking back, I think I went way too early. And, you know, most people, most successful applicants, they are at the stage of their career where they have not only are they sure of what they want to do, they come in with 10 years of work experience in that field. And like you also mentioned, there are very handful of Indians at the top, universities. I would say at the top 10 universities currently in the US, there will be about 3-4 Indians. And that also, I think I might have just over-exaggerated the number. But there's a big reason for that. And I just want to give you like an example of two other doctoral candidates at American universities that I know currently. One just graduated last year and from Penn itself, and he was a guy who, worked in intellectual property for 10 years with top senior counsel at the Delhi High Court before deciding to pursue a doctorate. He'd already written a commentary on that subject which was cited by the Supreme Court. So he came in from there. The other Indian I know currently pursuing a doctorate at Columbia right now is a lady called Arundhati Kajju. Most people would know her from the Navteej Singh Johar case, and she was a Times top 100 most influential people list. But she's come and to do a doctorate after like 10, 12 years of practice in the human rights space, litigating in the Supreme Courts of India. So a lot of people, by the time they actually apply, they have very sufficient mastery over a subject, at least in their own domestic level. So yes, for me, how did constitutional law happen? Like I said, I was taking a lot of classes in this human rights spectrum, and I took a class called Constitution Outside the Courts. From the description of it, it seemed like it has something to do with human rights, because I do remember reading in the description, this course will study how social movements change constitutionalism in America, something blah, 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 how the battle for human rights of workers, of LGBT individuals and all were not fought within the courts but outside, something like that. And I said, okay, this has something to do with human rights, let's take it. Actually, that class had nothing to do with human rights. It was a very very high level theoretical course which basically dealt with one question: why do courts decide why should courts be deciding constitutional cases? As simple as that. Or why are like 9 judges, again in the American concept, why do 9 judges have this absolute power to say something that the elected branches did is wrong? Why, those deeper philosophical questions. And why are they judges? If we do want to have a check on the government, why don't we have 9 random people who can decide? Why would a judge decide whether abortion is something that is acceptable for the society better than a mix of a doctor, a lawyer, a scientist, etc.? So it was one of those deep philosophical courses about these questions. And it was actually the first time in life, I always thought I really liked international law, but this was the first time in life I started something and I'm like, this is brilliant. This is thoroughly fascinating. It's magnificent, and this is what I want to study, though I know nothing about it, but this definitely seems like something I want to study. So yeah, it was a serendipitous moment.
But tell us, like you said, a lot of people have experience prior to doing their doctorate in whatever subject field they want to. You did not have so much of an experience, in the constitutional law field. So how did you go about applying for it, and what do you think made the university, sort of accept you as an applicant?
So I didn't have very little thing. I had nothing on my resume. Though I did try and market my work with the judge and that, at least in the application, as something to do with constitutional law, but it really wasn't, or something to do with that. So like I said, doctoral applications are pretty much based on 2 things: grades, which pretty much even master's applications are based on. Grades are thoroughly important. So that was one thing I tried to maintain pretty high. I in my LM, I did strive for exceptional grades. I worked my ass off in trying to get really high grades. So that was something I got taken care of. The second thing, that's where most people lose out, and that's actually developing a kind of research proposal that's very well thought of, that kind of, where you understand what it is to do research in that field. And that was something where I actually did a really bad job, because obviously I don't know much. But I still tried to do the best I could. But I think this is a place where, again, sometimes luck plays into it. So the course that I took, I spoke to. So I initially, when I went there, I realized actually how hard doctorates are to get in. In India, I kind of underestimated how hard they are to get in. But perhaps, while going there, I realized, okay, this is not so easy. So initially, I thought let me put this off for a bit. Let me, do some research-based work for a bit, and then let's let's have a look. So, with this in mind, I still had a conversation with this professor that, at some point I don't know too much about this field, but I want to read up over the next few years. And at some point, come back and pursue a doctorate when I think I can develop a proposal. And she didn't like, she just went like, okay. Good. Like, nothing like that. And then I spoke to someone, who basically handles the administrative side of admissions. And he said, just give a shot of applying. If like a faculty, not much is going to change between now and 5 years. Yeah, you might know something more, but a lot of, admissions about getting into doctorates is really based on how capable a university thinks you are to do research. So while again, that I don't think that's completely true, because the latter, that is your capability to do research, often comes with experience and knowledge of the field. But I applied, and when I applied, I again spoke back to this lady who, like, by that time she actually thought I had a lot of potential. So she really put up a hand that, I definitely think this is a guy who we should, take a shot with. He seems really interested in doing the kind of things he says he wants to do, and I think he has potential. So yeah, I owe a lot to, a little bit luck, a little bit support from someone. So for me, I definitely do think a lot of luck did play into getting it. But yeah, but yeah, by and large, everyone doesn't get lucky. That's also another thing. And that's why, and there's another very big thing that bars a lot of Indians from getting into doctorate programs, and that is, we actually have no idea how to research or even write. We are not taught that in our law schools.
Was research also something you figured out yourself, or did you take someone's help to understand how does it really?
I think it's a two-way stream. So doctoral degrees are generally by and large independent work. Like, no one sits and like holds your hand and goes like, okay, today you have to read page number 10 to 25. No one does that. So yes, I mean, it's something I figured out on my own. But now here the difference compared to, say, my undergrad education was that at any given time I had 4 or 5 really accomplished mentors to just go and ask things. I remember I had a conversation with my advisor about a very small and silly thing. I said, what? There is so much in this world to read. How do I decide what's more important to read or not? And I won't go into that discussion, but like, these were the kind of questions I sometimes could ask people who've been there, done that, get their opinion on how to do things, and then figure out what's my own style of doing things. So I think a big factor about research and writing is definitely developing your own style of doing things. But you do have people to hear back from that, how did you go about it? There was another question. I think this again might be like a little relevant for at least undergrads watching it. Is I did have a conversation. I asked the same question to all the people on my doctoral committee. I said, when do you read it? Do you like sit and read one article a day? Do you keep 1 month aside a year just to read? Do you read as and when things come? Because what happens as and when things come is you never actually end up reading. And different people gave me different answers. And I've still not figured out how do I go about it. I think I do it more on priority basis. Sometimes I'll just keep 1 month aside for reading. Sometimes I'll read an article every day. But again, these were things I still got an idea of at least the kind of way people are going about it. So yes, these are things you figure out on your own. Same goes with writing. You write something the first time. It's pathetic, especially because we're not taught how to write. Our general Indian style of English is very verbose. It's most of us aren't good writers, even when we think, and even when our professors and teachers tell us, wow, your English is fantastic. Most of the times our English is not fantastic, it's just that we know big words. And this is something I've, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah. I think, so a lot of us, again, at least from an academics point of view, we don't write really well. And that was definitely true for me. I did think I wrote decently, but as it goes, I was pathetic at it. So what happened the first time I wrote something, I sent it to my advisors for feedback. I got a complete red copy. I realized the mistakes I'm making, and these are very small things. Like, I realized I use whiles and howevers a lot. I realized I use passive voice a lot. I realize I have long sentences. I realize I make very ambitious claims which are not really adequately backed. So, every time you learn a new mistake about yourself and you just keep improving, it's a process. Still, there are a lot of flaws that exist in my writing. It's anywhere close to like the best writers in academia I see. But it's a process. But the big advantage you have now versus then is you actually have people who really understand this. I mean, again, a lot in Indian law schools, it's like someone wants to know how to do academic writing. It's by and large you going to your bhaiya didis and asking them, is this paper written well? And because, it's not as if they've published at, the Harvard Law Review or the Modern Law Review in the UK or the Oxford Journal of Legal Studies that they really know very well how to go about it, that they can give you the right advice. So, but yes, a lot of them are very helpful. They'll tell you something that still helps improve. But structured guidance always makes an impact, and I think it's a process. So yeah.
Wonderful. So you have a fair idea about the legal education system in India and abroad. Why don't you tell us the key similarities and dissimilarities that you see in
See, the first thing I would definitely say, it's very unfair to compare. I generally, kind of hate this juxtaposition of India versus US. It's very unfair to compare. I think any of the Ivy League, just the law schools itself, or your Oxbridge, their own budget, just one college, would be more than all the national law schools in India combined. And way more than that, I feel. I mean, these are like multi-billion-dollar companies. They have that kind of budget. So it's very unfair to compare them. Even an institute like Jindal, which I have a lot of respect for the way they are, or Ashoka, the way they are, changing the face of education, legal education in India. The net worth of the owner of Jindal, his entire net worth, it's still less than the net worth of most Ivy League institutions, or again, some of the other non-Ivies which are as good, like Stanford, etc. So you can't compare the amount of resources that are there at the disposal. So it's really unfair to compare, because these institutes can just do so much more with the money they have, from having the most fabulous of libraries, like to having the most expensive databases. Like I joke with someone, and I think GLC's changed a little bit, but Penn has more databases like SCC, Manupatra, etc. subscribed on India than GLC. And so for SCC, we have kind of like a common system. Like you don't have your passwords. You can just access the college's central thing. One thing you can do is you can see who else downloaded what. And I did that once. I had to just pull out one article very recently. This was a few months back. And I looked at the last person who ever pulled out an article. The last person before me to ever pull out an article was me 5 years ago. So in 5 years, that was how much it was used.
Oh.
So yes, I mean, the first thing is that these universities have so much more resources at their disposal. At the same time, they have the kind of professors who've studied the topmost universities, who've achieved, the kind of recognition in their fields to teach, and they exist at these universities because these universities have the paying potential. So I mean, to start with, it's just simply that. I think in India, people who are there at universities more often than not try really hard to do the best of their abilities. But I think the one major difference, and I like I said, in India, I think people do the best of their abilities to do it, is the lack of real academics teaching in India. For example, when we were at Government Law College, I don't think we had a single hardcore academic, out and out academic, who in law subjects, who had done their PhD, who had published papers, really teaching us. So I think that's the main thing, and that's why I said I have a lot of respect for places like Jindal, Ashoka, who are changing it. They're encouraging Indians who are academics to come and start their careers here rather than staying abroad. So I think and that plays a very huge role in the basics of understanding how subjects work. For example, a lot of practitioners, when they come and teach, their entire way of teaching something is so oriented to what's happening in courts. But there's actually a step before that. And I feel a lot of practitioners, they forget the fact that to really practice well in courts, and for them, it might have worked out in whatever ways. You need to really understand their subject. You, just by knowing how courts decide company law matters, that would still take you to the top of your field. There is a theoretical aspect to understanding the underpinnings of, say, even a company law or a contract law. Like in company, just take company law, for example, which most people, in India end up going and practicing. Someone was telling me that their company law professor in the US spent 4 classes just discussing what it means to own shares, and 2-3 classes discussing, which is a cumulative 6 hours discussing why do you really incorporate companies? What's the need to incorporate companies? Or for example, take intellectual property, for example. Why really does, one of the most fascinating questions someone really pointed out to me is, why should someone have the moral right to own a patent? Just because they were the first one to discover it, that's like, and why they were the first one, not even sometimes to discover it, to first someone to like go ahead and patent it. It goes back to a very similar idea where when colonialism happened, countries went to countries where people already existed and said, we are the first people to discover it, so we own it. So, there are some of these deep moral questions, and I think they really help. And this is what, trained academics can help you think about. So I think the big thing that lacks in India is just the sheer number of trained academics. And what we need to do to change that is, first, we need more institutes, more private philanthropists pumping in money to establish the kind of private universities like the ones I mentioned. It also requires a lot from our government to really, pump in the kind of money in legal education that's needed to attract people. Because right now, a lot of people who want to stay in India and teach, they only do because of a sheer love for this country, especially people who are qualified to get jobs abroad. So I think that's what needs to change. But yes, we definitely do need to encourage more qualified people to come and teach. And I think that's the main difference. And that can only happen when we pump in more money into academia, into education, realize that education is important. But yeah, I don't think like there is really an out and out yes, there are a few teaching things which are similar to which are specific to every country that, exist. But I don't think at a very large level beyond the fact that sometimes these universities just manage to get better people to teach you. That's the big difference.
That's very insightful. Thank you for that. Our last question to you is that, we know that you mentor a lot of law students. Tell us, what is that one question which is the most asked question,
I think the most asked question is, we want to do X, Y, Z. How do we make our CV for that? What should we do to improve our CV? That's pretty much the most...
That basic is the question.
That's the most basic question. Or should I do this? Is this good for my CV?
And what do you
I think, yeah. So I pretty much tell them that, the most important thing for CV is marks, and which is true at all levels. You have good marks, you'll figure out other things to do. So I say rather than trying to fill pages on your CV, try and get good grades. But the second thing I always tell them is quality over quantity. 10 moots are not going to make a difference on your CV. 10 unknown moots are not going to make a difference on your CV. If you can just do one Jessup or a Vis and do really well in it. Similarly, 20 papers at paid journals which don't even have legitimate websites is not going to do much for your CV if you can get one. So you work 3 years on one paper and get it published in an international journal. So quality over quantity. Just have the patience, spend the time, and don't fall in the trap of filling your CV with numbers. Same thing, I think people repeat this even with internships, that better than 150 1 month internships is better if you find 1.5 year gig where you can actually start working at that place as a full-time employee almost. So that's pretty much my suggestion for everything. Just quality over quantity, and don't fall into the trap of filling your resume with numbers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amal. It's been a very exciting conversation. I'm sure many students will learn many things that they wanted out of this conversation. Thank you for taking out the time for joining us today at 5.
Welcome.
And
Thank you for having me.
And to everyone who's watching us live and will be watching the recording, thank you so much for joining in. Also, just want to let you all know that we're summing up our season 2 of Unsuited this Sunday at 5 p.m. We have a fantastic father-daughter duo. We have the senior solicitor Homi Pittit and his daughter Sharina Pittit, who is the head of India practice at Norton Rose, joining us. It'll be a lot of fun, so don't forget to register. The registration link is in the Grey Matter bio. And I will see you next week. And thank you so much, Amal, and
Okay.
have a fantastic
Okay.
weekend
Bye
also.
bye.